Hey there, and welcome back to the Aletha's Legacy website build. My name is Jonathan, and this is the second episode in our series. Today, what we're going to be building is the footer. In the previous episode, we built the website header, so we're going to do the footer this time around, and then our next episode is going to be actually building the homepage content. Before we get started, if you can take a moment to hit that subscribe button, it does help me tremendously, and I really appreciate it. So we're going to go ahead and get started right after you hit that subscribe, so I'll wait just a second. And now we're good to go. Okay, so here is our header we worked on last time. So we're actually in our site-wide template. Remember the one before that we created called all pages in the last episode. So what we're gonna do this time is just build our footer. So switching over here to our Figma mockup, we have this footer right here. So we have kind of a similar setup to our header with the darker version on top, and then we have the lighter version on the bottom. And this one is probably going to be a grid layout right here. So we'll have one div that kind of wraps all of this content. We're going to have another one that takes up probably 2 squares. And then we're going to have a small one. And actually, maybe this will be 5. We'll kind of play with this and see what the layout ends up looking like. But this will almost certainly be a grid layout. And then this one down here will probably just be a flex layout. So what we're going to do is go back over here to Oxygen, and in our structure panel, I'm going to make sure I have the body tag selected. So when I add a new div, it goes down to the underside right here. I'm going to go ahead and leave my footer up here in the middle of the page. Typically what I do is add an inner content element in the middle, set that guy to a minimum height of something like 75 VH, which is viewport height. And that kind of pushes my footer to the bottom of the page regardless of how tall my content is. But I want our footer to be right here and visible. The very first thing I'm going to do to this footer is set the tag to footer here. And then we will also rename this section in our structure panel. It's a habit I'm trying to get into for when people come behind me so they can easily figure out what is what. So we're essentially going to do the exact same thing that we did before. So we're going to have some divs for our rows that have the background color. Then we're going to have another one inside it that restricts it to page width. And then we're going to build the content inside of that. So let's go ahead and do this. So inside of this footer, I'm going to create one div here. This width we're going to set to 100%. This background color is going to be our darker green from before. And then we're going to add in another div inside of this. Remember, we created that class earlier called page width. So it's al-div-page width. And that is going to set this to 100% width and a max width of 1220 pixels. Now I'm essentially just going to duplicate this one. And then I am just going to change this one's background color to our lighter green. Now we want to go ahead and set these divs to be centered. So I'm going to come back here to my main wrapper. Make sure you're on the ID here and just click on center. You can see the differences is very minute, but it's now no longer on the left edges. Just make sure you hit center on both of these guys. I think I called these content containers. Okay, so I actually just called it top row and then page container. So I'm going to rename these as well real quick. Okay, so I got everything labeled. I think this is just a good habit to get in, which is why I'm trying to do it here. So we have our top row with our content container. So this is the div that we would actually add things inside of. And then we have our bottom row, which is the same thing. So our top row has our logo. It's got 2 different text sections, and that's about it, but they are varying widths. So that's what I was saying. I think we're gonna do this with grid. So let me go ahead and minimize some of this other stuff to eliminate some confusion. And then in our content container, you guessed it, I'm going to add in another div. This guy I'm going to set to utilize grid. And then our column count at the moment, I think we're going to do 5. Then what I'm going to do is add in another div inside of this. Let me expand here. And I will call this guy grid layout. And I'm not going to worry about naming these divs because it will be pretty apparent here in just a minute what it's going to look like. So we're actually just going to duplicate this 3 times. Even though I set the grid layout to 5, because I want some of these to take up 2 spaces instead of just 1. So we're going to end up with 3 divs that essentially take up 5 slots. So what we're going to come back to is this grid layout div right here. This first one I'm going to set to a column span of 2. And then I think this one is going to be 2 as well, if I'm not mistaken. We'll play with this and kind of see how the layout looks in just a little bit. Now the other thing I'm going to do is set this grid layout div to 100% width, so it stretches to the bounds of our container here. We probably have something like 25 pixels of padding inside of this. Let's actually take a look at our container here. So we have 48, we'll go 48 top and bottom on this content container here. Actually, no, we're going to use the top row. That's going to just make it universal. So we're going to go 48 and 48. So that's going to give us some nice breathing space. And then inside this div, I'm not going to worry about spacing at the moment. We're just going to insert our logo. It's probably too big for the moment, but we'll see how that works. And then what do we have in this middle one? So we have contact information and then our mission. I kind of suspect our mission shouldn't be to the edges here because nothing else is, well, I guess this video is that far over. But yeah, I don't know. I think this should probably be somewhere like right there. So maybe I'm just going to restrict it inside of the box there, but we'll see. So this is going to be a heading. So we're going to set up a class here. Let's go with a heading element. We're going to add in a class here. We'll call this Aletha's Legacy AL hyphen heading hyphen. Let's go like H3. Our tag will be H3. Our font color is going to be white. Text is going to be uppercase, I do believe. And then what are the specific specs on this heading? So if I can get to it, there we go. 700 font weight. And then we have a letter spacing of 1, and that's about it. So letter spacing of 1, font weight of 700. And then it's going to be contact us. Our font size was like 16 pixels. And then we're probably going to want some margin underneath it. I'm going to go with 16 pixels. Looks like this group is a little bit messed up, so it's not quite working the way I want it to. I'm going to go with 16, and that should be more than plenty. What I'll do is go ahead and duplicate this. And the reason I'm using a class here is if I come back and decide I want to change the font size to 24 pixels, I just do it in that one place, and of course it applies to both. Now we're just going to use a regular text element underneath this. And what I'm going to do instead of changing every single individual element's text color to white is in this container, I can just simply go to the typography tab, set it to white, and then everything inside of it will just inherit that white color. Okay, so I'm just going to pop in this information here, and we're just going to set it to left align. I think I will make this a text link, so I'm going to take this out. I'm going to add in a text link element. Make that our blue. The reason why this didn't inherit the white color is because it's technically an A link. So we'll need to change this to white there. And then our hover color, maybe we'll go with like a dark green. Does that show up? That contrast is not super great. I might come back to these link colors, but I just want there to be some indication that that's working at the moment. So that's nice and simple. We'll leave that alone. The only other thing is that our content here, we would need to change this to tell. And there we go. So now our phone number is going to be clickable. Then this other section is our mission. So once again, I will just take this text here. And I'm just basically going to this content tab here in Figma and copying it. I am going to change this heading to our mission. This will be our text. Pop that in. I'm going to change this to left align as well. I should probably actually do it on these divs just to be consistent instead of the actual text element, so then everything's left align. Then once again, I'm going to add 16 pixels of margin, and we're going to use our link wrapper, and we're going to add in our class that we designed for our header button here. So this one was just called button primary. We simply need to add in a text element inside of it, and then this guy is going to say, I think it was donate. Is that what it was? Yes, donate now, in fact. Okay, so I don't have the link destination for that just yet, but that's okay. Not going to worry about that for now. So here is our first row done. Let's go take a look on the front end real quick. So that looks perfect. I'm really happy with that. The bigger logo, I actually don't really mind, to be honest. I think it looks good. So I think I'll leave it just exactly as is. Okay, so the other thing we need to do before we get too carried away is make sure that this works on mobile, which out of the box, because of grid, it's not going to. So let's go to our page container at 1220. This actually doesn't fit here. I think we can make this fit by changing this width to 100%, if I'm not mistaken. Nope, that didn't work. It must just be a limitation of grid. So what we can do is go back to our grid layout here, and at our page container breakpoint, we're going to go with grid. Let's set this to column count maybe of 3. And then at 992 and below, I think we'll just change this to grid and go column count of 1. And it all does fit. We probably need to add a little bit more spacing here, but it's okay. The best thing to do with that is going to be utilizing this gap functionality. So we can change this to like 40 pixels and then 40 pixels there as well. Now this one is not actually going to do anything because that's for when the grids are side by side and we only have one row at the moment. So don't worry about that one. But if we jump back up, then everything will fit all nice and tidy. All right, so now we can move on to the second row in our footer here. So let's just go check real quick what we have. So there's a copyright text here, which I think is kind of silly. I don't really do copyrights typically. And then we just have some very basic text links that will just replicate the main menu. So how much spacing do we have here? So it's 30 pixels top and bottom. So there, we are just going to go ahead and add that directly into this content container here. Again, I'm going to do it on the row itself. So this will be 30 pixels top and bottom. And then inside of this, I'm just going to simply add a div and duplicate it. I'm going to go back to my content container here. Make sure you're on the ID and not that class because we're going to set this one to horizontal and we'll go with space between. Now inside this guy, this text element, I don't even know what I'm going to do in this case. I'll just put this in there for now. I'm not sure exactly what we would change this to. And then inside this div here, we're just going to add simple text links. I can never get that right. I always want to type in, I don't know what I'm typing in. It's not the right thing, that's for sure. So AL, and we'll go with footer links. So our text color on these is going to be white. Do we have anything special on these? Or, oops, that's not what I meant to do. There we go. Anything special on these guys? So it's font weight 500 and that's it. So nice and simple. We'll go with font weight 500 and then we'll need some margin on the right side. Let's just go with maybe like 8 pixels. That should be enough. So we'll change this guy to home and I'll just duplicate that a couple of times. Then this div here on the right hand side, we want that to be horizontal. And then we'll just go ahead and change these like we did before. So about us, events, gallery, projects, and then contact. So since we already have a donate button in the upper part of the footer, I'm not going to add it right here. I feel like that's a bit redundant. But what I do want to do is on the ID of this last text element, I'm going to go into the margin and set that guy to 0. So it butts up right to the bounds of the container. This one, I also want to set this text color to white. And then the final thing we want to do is double check this as our breakpoint shrink here and kind of see what happens to the content. Right at 992, it's probably going to be a bit too crammed. So I think here I'll go ahead and stack it vertically and make sure it's left aligned. And then at this point, you probably want to add some margin underneath this leftmost div. Just like we've been doing, you can do 16 pixels of margin. And honestly, something I should be doing is using rim units. One rim is equivalent to 16 pixels. And then if for accessibility purposes, somebody has their spacing increased, the rim unit will kind of help. But it's a habit that I haven't been able to break, is just using pixels. So something worth considering for the future. And then let's go down a couple more steps here. So we're going to go to 768. That still does fit, but I think at 480, it is crammed, as you can see. So I think what I'm going to do is go back to 768. I'm going to go to these text links here. I'm actually going to set the footer link class to display none. And then what I'm going to do is take this icon. I'm going to duplicate that, and then I'm going to bring it down all the way to the bottom here. We already have that display functionality set up. I think on this one, we may have to make some adjustments, but we do need to change the way that this hamburger menu triggers the modal. So if you remember before we used this ID, we need to actually add a class to this. So let's go with AL. We're going to call this menu trigger. So copy that. And then on this icon up here, we need to add that trigger. Then on our modal, we need to go back to trigger and change this guy to a period and then the class name that we just created. So if we save this, let's go take a look on the front end. So we have our full menu here on the desktop variant. And then let's go with inspect. So this is the iPhone screen size. We have our hamburger. So if we click that, now this one activates that same modal that we designed from the previous episode. And then there is the same modal up in the header. So that's perfect. Now I want to quickly just fix, because this is 2021 or 2022, whenever you're watching this. This is the correct year, so we're going to pop that there. And just like that, now we have a functional footer. Let's refresh. And everything is, of course, butted up against each other because we don't have an inner content element, which we're going to go ahead and add now. So what I'm going to do is basically just, if I can get there in my structure panel, I'm going to minimize both my header and my footer. Click on the body tag here, and we're just going to add in inner content. We're going to stick this in between the header and the footer. And what I was talking about earlier that I like to do is set the minimum height on this to something like 75 VH. So now when I save this and I go look on the front end, then there we go. Now, of course, there's nothing in the page content right now anywhere on this site, but as you can see, it does push our footer down despite the fact that there's nothing there. So if you had a really short page content, let's say one heading and a few sentences, that way your footer's not floating and you don't see kind of what is essentially beneath the footer, which would be nothing in most cases. So there we go. That is us designing a relatively simple footer, 2 rows. We combined Flexbox and Grid, which is really cool that you can take advantage of those layout options in future sites. This is something that I do on basically every site. Next up, we're going to be designing the homepage content, so make sure you stick around for that video, and I will see you very soon.